Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me, and today we're going to discuss another 5 really simple and cheap modifications that you can make to your overland vehicle before you head out on the road. And I know you guys really loved the last video I did on that, so check it out if you haven't seen it, then come back to this one. So these mods, they apply equally as well if you're setting off to drive around the world like I've done, if you're driving across a few states, or even if you're just setting out from home for a weekend. These are things that I consider essential, and if I'd bought a different overland vehicle, I would do these mods before I even take it on my very first trip. So let's get into it. 5 more simple and cheap mods for your overland vehicle. So the first modification you can make is to lock absolutely everything that's on the outside of your vehicle. And before we even get into locking it, my first piece of advice would be to minimize whatever's on the outside of your vehicle. Even if you're staying close to home, and especially if you're going worldwide, curious fingers are gonna come over and they're gonna tinker with anything on the outside. If it isn't bolted or locked onto the vehicle, there's a chance it might get stolen, and that'll be a real bummer. So here on the back is really the only stuff I have outside my Jeep. I've got my shovel, I've got max tracks, and I've got a high lift. I want to make sure they can't get stolen. So what I have here is a cable lock made by a company called Bolt Security. And this is a really cool lock because it uses the ignition key for my Jeep. So when you first buy it, you buy one specific to your type of key, whether it's Ford or GM or Jeep or whatever. And the first time you use your key in the lock, it will remember your key from then on. So you don't even have to carry an extra key around, but now all of my stuff is locked on the back here. So really great to have to make sure these things don't get stolen. Because I have a Wrangler, I also have a locking gas cap. So I want to make sure nobody can steal my gas, but I want to make really sure that nobody can put anything in my gas tank. That would be a disaster. Also specific to the Wrangler, I have a hood lock. This is also made by Bolt Security, and I'll stick a link down in the description. So it uses the ignition key, and this way I can be sure no one's going to mess around under the hood and damage or take anything. When I said lock everything on the vehicle, I literally meant everything. So my spare wheel here and the 4 wheels that are on the ground, they all have lock nuts, which is going to make it much harder for someone to steal them if I leave it parked on the street for a couple of hours. So rule number 1, if it's outside the vehicle, make sure it's locked. The second modification you can make that again nobody seems to talk about is mud flaps on your vehicle. And I know mud flaps aren't really cool and lots of people just throw them away for off-roading, but I can tell you from experience, if you live out of a vehicle for months or years, when it throws mud on itself, that gets really annoying. You put on a clean shirt and then you go to get something from the passenger seat, you lean over and suddenly your clean clothes aren't clean anymore. So for me, mud flaps on the rear and on the front, they're really a must-have. They're also the law in many countries, and so you want to make sure that your vehicle complies. And especially on the rear, it's just really nice for other road users. Your mud flaps, they're going to catch a lot of rocks that you would be flicking up into their windscreen. So do everyone a favor, make sure that you're running mud flaps. You're going to enjoy your trip, and everyone else isn't going to get mad at you for throwing rocks and mud all over them. The third thing you should definitely add to your overland vehicle is a good fire extinguisher. So I've got mine mounted here at the back because I do so much cooking here, but I think it would be equally good down beside the driver's seat. So while you're cooking, or certainly while you're driving, a vehicle fire is not impossible, and we are trying to get as remote as we possibly can. So you want to make sure you have the ability to extinguish a fire. Make sure you get a good size fire extinguisher. There'd be nothing worse than having one that's too small. And make sure it's rated for all the different kinds of chemicals that you're going to use. So usually it's called A, B, C. That's what you want to run. And always make sure it's recharged and ready to go. I did actually use my fire extinguisher under the hood of the Jeep when I was in the no man's land between Nigeria and Cameroon. It's a long story I'll save for another day. I wrote about it in my book, and one of these days I'll get around to telling you guys here on YouTube. But certainly a good quality fire extinguisher, you'd be crazy to have an overland vehicle and not have one on board. The fourth item on my list is pretty self-evident. You really should carry a safety vest for every person that's in your vehicle and at least one safety triangle. And you're going to put this on the road in the event of a breakdown or some kind of emergency to warn other vehicles that something's going on. So both of these are actually mandatory in many countries in the world, and this is really classic stuff that they're going to try and bribe you for. If you haven't seen my videos on bribery and extortion, check those out as well. But you want to make sure you have these in your vehicle. They're a really good idea for safety as well as avoiding the extortion attempts. So just a couple of weeks ago, I was driving here in Canada and a guy managed to get himself stuck in the ditch, but he was sticking out onto the road quite a bit. Cars and trucks were coming by at 55 miles an hour, and it was actually a fairly dangerous situation for me to try and pull him out back onto the road. So I actually walked up the road about 500 yards and I put my two safety triangles basically blocking the lane in an attempt to have the trucks really slow down. It still wasn't working very well, so we had a bystander put this vest on and they went and stood down there and they were aggressively flagging the vehicles down to try and make them slow down before they came around the blind corner and were going to hit the back of my Jeep as I was pulling him out of the ditch. So really good idea to have both of these in your vehicle. They're cheap, you can pick them up at Harbor Freight or wherever, but throw them in your vehicle, you'll be happier and safer for it. The fifth and final thing that you want to plan and prepare for with your overland vehicle is a spare key on the outside of the vehicle. So we're all human, we all make mistakes. You might lock your keys in the car or you might just lose your keys. And if you're out remote in the middle of some desert or down some logging road, that's going to be a really big problem. Especially in more modern vehicles, there's not really any way you can hotwire the vehicle, and even if you push start this, it's not going to run unless you have this electronic key. So what I have is a key that I've zip tied to the frame underneath the Jeep. And it is really hidden away, so it would be very unlikely that someone's going to find it. In fact, every time I look for it, just to see if it's still there, I have to spend a really long time to dig and reach right up where I put it. And you might worry that someone will be able to use that key to steal the vehicle, so I have a plan for that as well. The key that's under the Jeep, it's not electronic at all. It's just a bland steel key, just like any generic one. So that key, it will unlock the doors, but first of all, that sets the alarm off, which is going to attract a lot of attention, and it doesn't start the engine. So the Jeep won't start without a correct electronic key. So my plan is that I would use that key to unlock the door, and that would set the alarm off. From there, I then know where there is a different key hidden inside the Jeep that'll get me into one of my lock boxes. And then inside that lockbox, I do have a full electronic spare key that will start the engine and I can turn the alarm off with that key. And I had this system in place for Alaska to Argentina. Thankfully, I never had to use it. And all the way around Africa, I did actually lock the keys in when I was at the international border between Tanzania and Burundi. There was a bunch of guys surrounding the Jeep. I was trying to exchange money. I had my passport and my Jeep papers in my hand. I got flustered and I didn't like them crowding me. So I dropped all my important things on the driver's seat and then I closed the door. And the second I did it, I realized what I'd done. The keys were dangling from one of my lock boxes. I could see them through the window. So if I didn't have a spare key on the outside of the Jeep, I would have been seriously screwed. I think I would have had to smash a window to get inside, and then I would have had to deal with replacing the glass. So smashing a window, obviously not ideal, but not being able to start your vehicle, that's an even bigger problem. So I really recommend storing a spare key somewhere on the outside of your vehicle. And if your vehicle needs an electronic key, make sure you have spares of it. If not at home, bring them with you on the trail because it's going to save you a lot of headache. So there you have it. That's 5 more simple things you can do to your vehicle to get it ready to head out and have grand adventures. So let me know down in the comments, are these things helpful? Had you thought of these already, or are you gonna go out now and do these? If you enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Plenty more real world advice videos like this coming. And next week, I'm setting out on a big adventure and I'm gonna bring you along for the ride and teach you how you can drive one of the most famous roads in the world. So that's coming up right here on The Road Chose Me. See you next time.